I'm a real-world Challenger business jet captain and former airline pilot. Any procedures or techniques I discuss with you today are strictly for flight simulator use only and for our entertainment. Always consult a professional flight instructor for flying lessons. Welcome back to Foxtrot Alpha Aviation. I'm Rob Hammer. Well, today we're just doing a really quick chat about some interesting things for the Challenger world, certainly, and certainly other aircraft. And that is the requirement for operators of this aircraft. Here today, I'm in Farmington, New Mexico. Guess what I'm doing? I'm finishing up the final touches on the long-awaited Telluride video. So we're going to be departing from in that video, we're going to be departing from this airport, Farmington, New Mexico, and heading over to absolutely gorgeous, super challenging Telluride. So hopefully you've had a chance to try it out. I'm working on it still. Sorry about that. It's just been a long process of making that happen. So without further ado, let's head into the flight deck here. So what we're going to talk about is 5G interference, 5G C-Band interference, and the airworthiness directive that the FAA and other nations have put into place for aircraft like the Challenger, and so many more concerns about it. So while we're talking about autopilots and ATS and all that kind of stuff, the AFM that comes with the aircraft has a whole bunch of procedures and that kind of thing that are in place, and pilots memorize all of these numbers I'm about to give you. But then everything's changed because now we have this 5G C-band wireless interference situation happening. And so what happens is that when we come into an airport that has, I'm just going to bring you over to it now. This is just an example. You can check it out anywhere you want, any airport, and see if you're affected or not. So this is Palm Springs, very popular location. Here's the NOTAM right here, and it says AD, autopilot, radio altimeter, unreliable, auto land, HUD to touchdown, enhanced flight vision systems, so HUD, that kind of thing. Helicopter operations requiring radio altimeter data to include hover autopilot modes, and CAT AB performance class, takeoff and landing not authorized for aircraft using approved, unless you're using approved methods of compliance, alternate methods of compliance due to 5G C-band interference. And please see airworthiness directives, blah, 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 all these different things. So that's what we're talking about. And this is a normal NOTAM. This is one from today from Palm Springs. And you can look up your own local airport and see if you're affected or not. But this airport in the United States is affected. And this is how we're going to deal with it in our aircraft. So first of all, let's talk about a few things. So the minimum autopilot engage height after takeoff, and these are all standard AFM things that all pilots in this aircraft learn, is that it is 320 feet AGL. The minimum autopilot use height for visual and non-precision approaches is 320 feet AGL. So those numbers are the same. 320 for autopilot engagement after takeoff, and 320 feet for turning the autopilot off prior to reaching 320 feet for visual and non-precision approaches. The next one, though, the minimum autopilot use for precision approaches, an ILS and LPV approaches with a glide path angle of 3.5 degrees or less is 80 feet AGL. So just so we're clear here, is that the autopilot right here, and also another system that's affected is the ATS, which is right here. We must disconnect prior to 80 feet AGL if we're doing an ILS, and also the LPV is disconnected prior to 80 feet as well. Another thing it says is that it is prohibited to select the transfer button. So that's way over here. The transfer is right there. The transfer button on the flight control panel while simultaneously making inputs on an FMS CDU. So that's just another limitation. Now here is the kicker. So we come back to this again. If the airport has this NOTAM in effect, this is what is also in effect. When operating in U.S. airspace, the following operations are prohibited in the presence of a 5G C-band wireless broadband interference as identified by NOTAM, like I just showed you, unless using an approved alternate means of compliance, which we're not. Here it is. Autopilot operation below 400 feet AGL. So, what does that mean? You cannot use the autopilot below 400 feet AGL in the presence of an airport that is restricted by the 5G NOTAM, which I just showed you. So our company uses 500 feet just to make it clearer. And basically we disconnect the autopilot, and we also disconnect the ATS system, because the ATS system in our aircraft is definitely used or uses the source of the radio altimeter to get its information in there. Because as you know, the ability for the ATS system to automatically reduce thrust at 50 feet, and all of those things are, all predicated by the use of the rattle, the radio altimeter. So what do? A normal takeoff briefing, like you've seen me do many times before. The only real change is that we're going to use the words. Let's just talk about a couple things first. So I'm in the thrust limit page, and as you can see, we're at 93.1 for takeoff. And how do I get there? I went perf, takeoff. We entered all this information in here. All of this information's put in here. We send the speeds, and once the speeds are sent, then we should have this very, very important to look for. It is this 93.1 limitation, which you can see the carets are right there. The thrust limit carets, N1, there and there, are available for manually setting the system. So what happens is we get to the end of the runway, we hit N1 takeoff, N1 takeoff, so Toto Nito, but then we disengage ATS. So ATS is turned off, and that is normally done by clicking off the ATS switches, which are right behind here on both sides. So either one is depressed, it shuts off the ATS, so this light will turn off. And then at that point, we are manually setting the thrust. So because we're manually setting the thrust, we're going to use a little bit of a different command. So assuming that the aircraft is on the runway, we're ready to take off, we're going to use the commands of the first thing that's going to happen is the thrust levers are going to be brought up manually, fairly close to the limits here, fairly close, so the other person doesn't have to do too much work. So the pilot flying brings the thrust levers up to here and then says set thrust. And that's the command for the pilot monitoring to continue to bring the thrust levers up so that we're very close to the N1 that's required for takeoff in 93.1. We don't sit there and make it perfect. We get it as close as possible. And then they respond with thrust set. And then we continue on. And now remember, this is a very, very busy time. The next call is going to be airspeed alive, 80 knots, V1, rotate, positive rate, gear up, and continuing on from there. Now, once we do that, there's a very important thing to remember, and that is turning the ATS system back on. Why? Because this 93.1 is only for 5 minutes. You only have 5 minutes of takeoff thrust. So if you go to perf, After takeoff, you're going to have climb thrust, and that's all part of using checklists, and that's why we use checklists. Specifically, well, obviously we use checklists all the time, but that's why it's so important. But the checklist for ATS, or the checklist, does not mention ATS, and it's really, really important. This guy would have definitely freaked me out in real life. I don't know what he's doing. But don't forget to turn ATS off or on after takeoff above 500 feet. Okay, so lots of things to think about during landing. If we're coming into an airport, do an ILS, LPV approach, where we normally would have the autopilot on, say, to 80 feet. If that's something that you want to do, we must turn it off prior to 400. In our case, we turn it off prior to 500 feet. So that's kind of a new thing. It's all about the 5G NOTAM that I just talked about. I'd love to hear your questions or concerns about it. I will be doing a live stream coming up next week, and hopefully with fingers crossed, the Telluride video will be out and we can talk about that as well. So that's all I want to really talk about today. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend. Rob Hammer out. Take care, everyone.